The following presentation was made possible through the generosity of the insurance firm of Lester Smart, Thurman, Tremmel and Arndt, 210 9th Street South, Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin.
Here. Welcome once again to my ongoing series of Central Wisconsin History by Request. In this presentation, you'll see more of the unusual, never shown before views of the area submitted by wonderful people just like you. So join me now as once again we wander back in time to the way it was and where we came from. History by Request, Volume 4. Our opening view is from an old lantern slide showing the Wood County Bank building when it was brand new. How do we know it was brand new? Because a corner-mounted clock was not yet in place. On the extreme left side of the picture is a very tiny building with a pointed roof line. Our next photo shows the building as it appeared when it was Mrs. Frechette's millinery store. The date of the picture is unknown, but the wooden sidewalk and dirt roads certainly take us back a long way. Now we do an about face and check out the tenants of the wood block at the time. As mentioned previously, East Grand Avenue was then called Vine Street. On the left was the Kruger and Warner men's clothing store, later owned by Schnabel and Turbin. Next was the Wood County Drug Store, which ended business in the 30s as Coyle's Drug Store. The next tenant was that of A.P. Hirzy, the jeweler, who was later bought out by E.J. Schmidt. The Schmidt Jewelry Store is still at that location. The last tenant in the wood block was Uncle Sam, the location of the local post office, which later moved to the west side location in the river block. On the subject of the wood block, this was Mr. Frank J. Wood, a highly respected man that our county was named after. Born in 1850, Mr. Wood died at the age of 81. A note on the side of this memento reads, "I knew Mr. Wood. We were members of the Rotary Club." Signed, A.A. Hagen. In this 2004 view, our camera is located on 1st Street North as once again we go back to the way it was in the days of wooden sidewalks and unpaved streets. The original name of 1st Street was Water Street. It appears that these girls all patronized the same hat shop. Little need for bike helmets with that soft dirt road. The date of this picture was about 1893. Because the white building on the right was replaced by a brick structure still at that location, which was built in 1894. And the farthest building on the right side of the street was part of the original location of the First National Bank, which was built in 1892. The Winter Hotel and privately owned telephone company were on the left side of the street. It was in 1917 when this picture ran in the Consolidated News showing a large group of local boys, Troop G, leaving to fight the Kaiser in World War I. The street was filled with families and friends as the young men boarded the train that carried them off to fight for Uncle Sam. It was a happier day in 1918 when this picture was taken, and those same families and friends welcomed them home at the same local Northwestern depot. In 1919, the city sponsored a great victory celebration, which included this parade. It was probably the last time most of the men would wear their uniforms. Notice that we could now boast of paved streets. This was the city band at the time. Elaborate floats were a part of the parade, like this one by the Daly Music Company that proudly proclaimed, "Music helped win the war." This horse-drawn float was sponsored by the Biron Division of Consolidated Local 187. Pretty girls complimented this float from Schill's Buick Garage, which proclaimed, "The car with lines, Buick." Wilcox Ready-to-Wear was represented by this float. It was also in 1919 that Grand Rapids hosted the State Elks Convention. Our central location made it the perfect setting for the event, and the community went all out to make it a spectacular. Decorative arches spanned several intersections, and the city pulled out all the stops to please the visitors. Most likely, this was the first state event ever held in our blossoming community. No doubt, the newly constructed Elks Club contributed to the selection. Here, Officer Louis Panter is on hand to keep the revelers in order. With the advent of the automobile, a brand new hazard presented itself, the possibility of having an accident. This is an ad that appeared in the January 1926 issue of Consolidated News for the local Taylor and Colburn insurance firm. In those days, you could buy an auto accident insurance policy for just $5 a year that paid you $25 a week for loss of time through an auto injury. Another issue of Consolidated News featured this photo, warning of the dangers of driving on icy roads. The caption under the picture tells us that the car slid on ice, caught fire, and burned off the roof and tires, and that the car was a total loss, but the passengers escaped injury. As long as we're on the subject of winter, I wonder if you could tell me where this winter scene was taken. This is Biron Drive as it is today. I took the earlier picture from this very spot back in 1942, just before I went into service. Obviously at the time, there was still a lot of land available in the area. And here's another local winter scene that you could guess at. Taken from the same location, here's how the area appears today. Going back, we are looking at the Smith Hardware Building, which was built in 1906. The name Hardware still appears on the building. We must assume that this picture was taken a few years after 1906, since the front awning is badly torn and shows considerable wear. Smith Hardware went out of business in the late 30s or so, and I remember buying 10 cents worth of nails there on a couple of occasions, perhaps to fix my sled or wooden coaster wagon. Upstairs was the Grand Rapids Business College. The building on the extreme left was a part of the Daly Opera House, which was destroyed by a fire shortly after this picture was taken. It's still winter in this photo, taken from the December 1929 issue of Consolidated News, showing Shaw Hill by his mail truck. Just as it is today, folks were requested to mail early and to buy Christmas seals. Shaw was well known and well liked in the community. You've probably heard many outlandish stories about Shaw, and most of them are true. Back to the subject of Biron, this is a very early picture of the Biron Mill. In those days, Biron was very much out in the country, so Consolidated built a number of company homes for employees and a small grocery store. This old postcard shows a bus that was used to transport Grand Rapids employees to the mill. A note on the back of the postcard, which was apparently sent by a Biron resident, says, "This is how we get to town." Busing employees to Biron was discontinued in the early 1950s. We've covered the Johnson Hill story in previous films, but I can't resist showing a bit more. What is unusual about this postcard is that the First National Bank building was not yet in the picture. The bank was built in 1921. And then there's this beautiful night scene postcard, and it's what's on the back that really tells the story. The card was sent by a Johnson Hill employee to Mrs. Albert Whitrock on July 7th of 1919. The message reads, "Your garment is ready to fit, Mrs. Martin." Now that's customer service. Obviously, Mrs. Whitrock didn't have a phone. Now let's move down to First Avenue as we take you back again to an earlier time when the old Moravian church dominated the area. Just a few blocks further south, it's also obvious that many changes have taken place. And how about this beautiful old car posed in front of the Nash residence, now home to the Mead Foundation? Notice that the steering wheel is on the right side. Perhaps it's English. Before construction of the Dubé Dam, our community was often plagued by high water. Such was the case as captured by this old lantern slide showing floodwaters covering the 1st, 2nd, and Baker Street intersection. The camera is looking directly up Baker Street. On the right side of the street, we can just make out that the water is at curb level. Here's another shot of floodwaters raging under the old Grand Avenue Iron Bridge. The year was 1910. Using this 2004 view, with our camera located near the Conway House and facing north, we again go back to 1910, when the flood inundated this area, 1st Street South. And this is how high water used to flood the old swimming pool on 1st Street North. Devastation of another sort also swept over our community from time to time. I'm referring to the numerous fires that were a part of our past. Perhaps most devastating was the Great West Side Fire of April 12, 1931. I was 8 years old at the time and remember it like it was yesterday. It was a beautiful spring Sunday. Strong winds blew from the southwest. It was about noon when suddenly I heard the mill whistle sounding off in short blasts, a signal that volunteers were needed. I looked toward the west from my boyhood home in the 900 block of 1st Street North and saw great clouds of smoke billowing up from the west side of the river. The inferno started about noon after a small fire at a hobo camp got out of control. It quickly spread, first destroying the E.W. Ellis lumber yard, and then on to the Shell and Standard Oil petroleum facilities, consuming over 500 barrels of exploding oil and petroleum. Flying embers destroyed more than a dozen homes and warehouses. Fire trucks and crews responded from a 60-mile radius. I remember people on the roofs of their homes with garden hoses. For a time, the entire northwest side of town was threatened. was all over, the loss exceeded $100,000 in 1931 dollars, which would translate into millions in today's market. It was just 3 years and 1 month later when the S&S clothing factory, located at the north side of the Green Bay and Western tracks between First Street and the river, was destroyed by fire, taking with it many much-needed jobs in that Depression era. The building was a total loss. The city promptly built a new structure on the west side, located in the 1100 block of Alton Street, and leased it to the clothing company so that it would put people back to work. The structure is currently used by the City Park Department. Back in the 1920s and 30s, there were a number of people who prospered in small business locations on our main street. People like Harry Wilpolt in the restaurant business, Mark Whitrock with his drugstore and lunch counter. Another such entrepreneur was Bob Kerin and his wife Mame. The Kerins ran a very small candy store and soda fountain. They also sold cigarettes, film, and magazines. The Kerins' original location was just to the left of Church's drugstore on a busy West Grand Avenue, where they introduced caramel corn to the area. Neat and clean was the Kerins' trademark, as we see in this photo. And check those 1930s prices. Chocolate-covered cherries, 15 cents a pound. Chocolate peanut clusters for just $0.25 a pound. And a pound of bridge mix was just 35 cents. In 1939, the Kerins moved into their new and larger location in the beautiful new Wisconsin Theater building. This is what a truly modern soda fountain looked like at the time. Lots of chrome and marble with a hint of Art Deco. In those days, and even well into the 40s, you could buy your Data Coke for just a nickel. The sturdy booths of chrome and red leather were fitted with plenty of hooks for hats and coats, and the Super Deluxe soda fountain featured more than 10 pumps to dispense your favorite flavors. The little candy store ended business shortly after Bob and Mame decided to retire. Truly the end of a wonderful era. And old local advertising tells us a great deal about our past, and I'd like to share a few with you, taken from old consolidated news magazines. The year was 1926, when you could buy a brand new Chevy from your local dealer for just $510. Johnson & Son is still in business on the west side, handled the Hudson Essex and Super 6. And imagine going to your hardware store to buy a car. Nash Hardware on Grand Avenue was dealer for the 1927 Whippet and Willis Knight cars. Notice all models featured four-wheel brakes and promised 30 miles to the gallon. Willis was the originator of the Jeep. And then there was Friedstein's men's store, where you could buy a two-pant suit for just $35. Or you could go to J.C.Penney for a pair of payday overalls at just $1.29. Notice that there is no use of that phony word sale in any of these ads. German's jewelry store was located in the River Block back in 1926. And competitor E.J. Schmidt was located across the river right where they are today. The Heilman store, located on the east side of the river at the time, later moved into the River Block when the area was vacated by the post office. At Werland's Tire Shop, you could buy tires for just $4.75. Of course, the inner tube was extra at $1.25. Kellogg Brothers and Marling Lumber were competitors at the time. Both are now gone. There were many coal companies. Here the Bossert Coal Company suggests you buy coal early. Where can you buy coal today? Another long-gone business was Central Wisconsin Electric Company that featured Maytag washers in the Consolidated News. Among the outstanding features was an electric motor for wired homes, a gasoline motor where no electricity was available. Competitor Aaron Plumbing at 210 West Grand Avenue was selling the Meadows machine. Never heard of it. Then there was John Niles Sport Shop, located in the Mead Winter Block, featuring lots of bait and tackle. In those days, real butter on your table most likely came from our local Wisconsin Valley Creamery on First Avenue South, now a parking lot. And for a real treat, it was Sunday dinner in the Crystal Dining Room at the Hotel Witter. Of course, Consolidated News also carried more than just advertising, like this front page photo asking for support for the Riverview Hospital in 1921. And then there was this cute little item. Guess who? This is 3-year-old George Wilson Mead II, Stanton's son. According to the caption under the picture, little George said, "Let's make this snappy and get it over with." So much for Consolidated News. Maybe more next time. Back in 1957, there was a company called Midland Cooperatives that sponsored the nightly weather report in those days of black and white television. I was fascinated by their logo because I felt that it would easily lend itself to animation. So I set to work designing, inking, painting on animation cells, and filming just like Disney. When I finished the project, I submitted the 16mm film to Midland's headquarters in Minneapolis, and they loved it. After all, this was pretty much state-of-the-art at the time. There was no such thing as a computer-generated image. Midland added the soundtrack, and the ad ran on Midwest TV stations for almost 4 years. If you're old enough to remember, this is what you saw each night when you tuned in the weather.
An open book, open records, open dealing, open to all. That's a Midland Cooperative, where people unite to serve themselves with quality goods and services. And now, the progressive business in your community that displays this sign presents the Midland Weather Report.
And if you're old enough to remember when TV was only in black and white, you'll also remember when milk was sold in glass bottles. This was the bottling operation at the local Fisher Dairy. The bottles were sealed with a simple cardboard disc. And in that wonderful era, your milk was delivered early each morning by a friendly milkman. You really didn't have to meet him like this housewife is doing, because each of the dairies supplied their customers with an insulated metal box that sat beside your door. Now, if the lady in the picture appears to be overdressed, well, not for that era. As Archer Bunker sang, girls were girls and men were men. And remember when Archie and Edith would sing, "Gee, our old LaSalle ran great." Young folks often ask, what's a LaSalle? The LaSalle was a fine automobile built by the Cadillac division of General Motors. This ad was featured in the centerfold of an October 1938 issue of Life magazine, showing the beautiful LaSalle along with its big brothers, the 1938 Cadillacs. GM eventually dropped the LaSalle line. In that same issue of Life was this ad for Chrysler's 1938 DeSoto, a name which was also later discontinued. Life magazine was loaded with these ads before the age of television, and not to be outdone, in that same October 1938 issue of Life, the new Plymouth, a name which was recently dropped, was featured. And you could own one for just $685 if you had it. Of course, there were no silly customer rebates in those days. Speaking of Life magazine, this large weekly photo news publication was just 10 cents a copy in 1938, printed on paper that was made right here in Wisconsin Rapids, where Consolidated's number 15 machine produced paper exclusively for Life magazine. It would seem appropriate in this year of 2004 to recognize the Wisconsin Rapids paper mill on the occasion of its 100th anniversary. It was on September 24th of this year that festivities were held to mark this memorable event and to pay tribute to the employees and management who over the years have contributed so much to this phenomenal success story. From the earliest days of the barefoot paper makers to the remarkable performance of today's technologies, we can only imagine what the future has in store for this fine company. And with that, I'll say so long for now until next time, God willing, when once again I'll bring you another History by Request. And by the way, keep those pictures coming so that I can add your name to the list of credits on my next presentation. I'm Paul Gross. Thanks for listening.